listener production.
Hi, Helen Smith here with you. Welcome to The Briefing. There are 28 international editions of Vogue, influencing millions of us around the world, and Anna Wintour was at the helm of it all. But that's about to come to an end with her replacement being announced, or is it?
Everybody thinks that she's resigned, but I think, in fact, she's made herself even more powerful. I'm pretty convinced she'll be there for life. I really do think she has a job for life. I mean, she's an icon.
That's coming up in the second half of this episode with a former editor-in-chief of Vogue Australia. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spuru. It's Friday, the 5th of September.
Hey Helen, and to you listening, happy Friday. Anthony Albanese says he's spoken to Donald Trump on the phone last night. In a post to X, the PM says the chat was warm and constructive, that they discussed trade and economic interests, including critical minerals, as well as shared security interests. Now, this is the fourth time Albo's spoken to the US president over the phone since his return to the White House in November, and comes amid mounting pressure from critics and the opposition to secure a face-to-face meeting.
While those are all the details we have of the chat so far, it's not hard to imagine that China would have gotten a mention. The US president earlier in the week firing off a post addressing the country's leader, Xi Jinping, asking him to give his warmest regards to Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un as they, quote, conspire against the United States of America. The trio were among a number of other world leaders, including those from Iran and India, who were in Beijing this week for a massive military parade marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II.
While Kim Jong-un is now on board his armoured train and is heading back home, this was his first visit to China since 2019, and overnight he held a rare one-on-one meeting with Xi where they've really, committed to further ties together. And while we are here, we do have an update from former Victorian Premier Dan Andrews. He was also there. In a statement, he's defended the trip, saying a constructive relationship with China is in Australia's national interest and that hundreds of thousands of Aussie jobs depend on it.
He's also addressed the backlash he's been copping for jumping in a group photo that featured the likes of Putin and the president of Iran, saying he's condemned Putin and his illegal war in Ukraine since day one of its, quote, illegal invasion, and unequivocally condemns Iran for its attacks on Australia, Israel and elsewhere around the world.
More allegations are being made against a Sydney childcare chain who this week mistakenly handed over the wrong child at pickup. It involves First Steps Learning Academy's centre in Sydney's south, which is currently under investigation, with an educator being stood down after a grandfather mistakenly took home the wrong child for 2 hours.
He was reportedly given the wrong child by the centre, who was asleep at the time, with the mix-up only being discovered once the real toddler's mother arrived at the daycare to pick him up, but he was not there. Speaking to media, the child's mother says she doesn't blame the grandfather, who was devastated by the mistake, rather blames the daycare, who she says are incompetent. New South Wales Police have been notified and the centre has assured the public this was an isolated incident.
But since then, various allegations have been made against the centre, with the toddler's mother saying it was not the first safety incident involving her son, alleging she had received 18 incident reports from the centre in the past 5 months, the latest being that her child fell headfirst onto a wooden floor after climbing on a table. A spokesperson for the centre has denied these further reports. Since then, though, more parents have spoken out against the chain, which owns 11 centres across Sydney, one alleging their 3-year-old child ran into the middle of a busy road whilst in their care at a separate centre in the city's southwest last month.
Indian Australian leaders are calling on Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price to apologise for falsely claiming the government was bringing Indian migrants to the country to boost its election results.
There is a concern with the Indian community, and only because there's been large numbers, and we can see that reflected in the way that the community votes for Labor at the same time.
The Liberal senator was quick to walk back the comments she made on Wednesday, saying it was a mistake to suggest Australia had a discriminatory migration policy. However, maintains she has nothing to apologise for.
The comments sent members of the opposition into damage control, with leader Susan Lee and Shadow Attorney General Julian Leeser having this to say.
I'm fighting for every single Australian, no matter where you came from.
The Indian community make a wonderful contribution. They've been involved in every imaginable aspect of life in this country.
Now, the Council of Indian Australians is among groups demanding an apology, saying the comments are hurtful and divisive, especially on the back end of a weekend where anti-immigration rallies took place across several cities and towns across the country, rallies that the Senator has backed.
The protests that took place on the weekend, one I'd say, first and foremost, they weren't necessarily protests. This was a pro-Australia march, because for so long, Australians who are proud to call themselves Australian have been under attack, particularly by the left, and have been told that we are a racist country.
Italian fashion designer and billionaire brand owner Giorgio Armani has died at the age of 91. The fashion legend created the luxury company in 1975 alongside his late partner Sergio Gagliotti and built it into an empire, expanding into beauty, fragrance, music, sport and even luxury hotels, bringing in nearly $4 billion Australian dollars a year.
Yeah, wow. Tributes have been flowing from prominent figures in the fashion world and celebrities, including Donatella Versace, who says, "The world's lost a giant today. He made history and will be remembered forever." The fashion designer helped reshape the industry for the better, including becoming the first to ban underweight models from the runway in the early 2000s.
And the brand's Instagram has put out a statement saying Armani worked until his final days, dedicating himself to the company, the collections, and the many ongoing future projects.
And we're going to end a massive week of news hearing from you, our listeners. We put a bunch of questions out to you this week in our broadcast channel Behind the Briefing on Instagram. And the first thing we learnt is that our briefers, Helen Smith, do not suffer from refuel anxiety. So this is the fear that more than 2/3 of young drivers have when it comes to parking at the Bowser, how to hold the nozzle, choosing the right fuel, etc., etc. In fact, 86% of you said no, you do not have this anxiety, while around 8% of you said you used to. Hello, I'm finding some solidarity in our listeners. And just 6% of you said that you do have refuel anxiety.
And shout out to Aya from Spotify, who says she's fine with refueling, but putting air in their tyres makes them anxious, which I actually feel that one. That is like, I totally get that. Now, we also found out how much the government's deportation deal with Nauru would cost this week. It was around $2.5 billion or $7 million per non-citizen being deported. And we put it to you guys with 97% of you saying that cost was not justified.
And we also heard about an unlucky Queenslander who found a button battery in her burrito bowl. So naturally, we wanted to know what you had found in your food, and wow.
This is pretty gross. Yeah. So someone said a blue Band-Aid, another said a hair clip, but this is foul. Laura said that they bit into a meat pie and spat out a tooth that wasn't theirs.
God, and see, my follow-up question for that, Laura, is was it a human tooth or was it like an animal tooth? We have further questions that need answering, and that is it for our headlines for today and for this week. Coming up next is your deep dive, Helen Smith, looking into Anna Wintour's replacement at Vogue. Quote-unquote replacement, while I add. Stick around, that deep dive is coming up for you next.
What are you looking at?
Anna Wintour's successor has officially been announced. Meet Chloe Malle, the 39-year-old self-proclaimed proud nepo baby who's been working at Vogue for over 15 years. And ironically, her mother played the role of a Vogue editor in the hit series Sex and the City. Now, Anna Wintour held the top job as editor-in-chief of American Vogue for over 37 years, becoming synonymous with the brand and a fashion industry icon. And whether we like it or not, Vogue, in one way or another, has influenced our lives, even if you've never picked up a glossy mag. It's been a cornerstone in shaping our culture, lifestyle, and platforming creatives, and, of course, fashion. But does it still hold the same relevance in the digital age? Or is it just becoming another clickbait machine? Now, with Chloe taking the title of Head of Editorial Content for Vogue US, will we see a shift? And how much influence does Anna still hold? Kirstie Clements was the editor-in-chief of Vogue Australia for 13 years. Kirstie, what do we know about Chloe Malle?
I do know that she's worked at Vogue US for a number of years because I always used to see her byline. She's worked there for over a decade. She's currently the digital editor and co-hosts their podcast. And I know that she's the daughter of Candice Bergen and Louis Malle, the film director, the French film director. Yeah, so to me, she's a Vogue staffer.
She has been labelled a nepo baby, but as you just said there, she's worked at Vogue for over a decade. I think it's nearly 14 years. What do you make of those labels?
I mean, yes, she's been born into a more privileged lifestyle that would have had better access to getting an internship at Vogue. I bet you she got an internship. But believe me, there have been plenty of nepo babies that have been through American Vogue on internships and didn't stay the course. Like, they probably lasted 2 weeks and said, oh, that was hard. So I don't think you get to have the term nepo baby. That may have got her a foot in the door. As everybody knows out there, you've got to prove yourself during your internship to be able to stay somewhere that long. So I'm very sure she is very qualified.
So what does this new appointment mean for Vogue? What does the title Head of Editorial Content for Vogue US entail?
Well, it really just brings Vogue US into line with all the other Vogues, because none of the other Vogues have an editor-in-chief anymore. They're all heads of editorial content, and they all report to Anna Wintour, who is at the top of the tree. She didn't even replace herself. Anna is still there. So she's put in a role. There is a role. Editorial content director is very different to the old school, the job that Anna did when she started at Vogue and was editor-in-chief with, in her opinion, was the only opinion. I mean, the world has changed enormously. And as Vogue sort of recalibrates and works out what it is in this digital world, you need to adapt to that. And I think that she seems to be coming from a digital background and doing the podcast in that sort of perfectly placed to be able to work out that world, while Anna is still there. Anna hasn't gone. She's just down the hall. She didn't give up her office. So imagine in a sort of big concept sense and visual sense, Chloe would be going to her to ask questions about things that, Anna is more au fait with. But the role of an editorial content director is just coming up to speed with the algorithm of how media runs today.
And speaking of the digital landscape that we find ourselves in, how important is Vogue still, not only in the fashion world, but in influencing culture and the zeitgeist?
I don't think it is as influential as it was. It's very hard to be influential. I think if you're looking at things that are more cutting edge, they're probably coming out of edgier publications that don't have to please advertisers and don't have to make those enormous numbers. And like everybody, that business, Vogue's been caught up with the numbers game and the algorithms. And I read something about Chloe where she was in charge of Vogue weddings, and Vogue weddings went up 30% or takes up 30% of Vogue's content. But it's numbers, it's what people are looking at. And so are you breaking new ground with people's weddings? I don't think so. So what's wagging the tail wagging the dog a bit now in terms of the big numbers are not necessarily the things that you're breaking ground with. They're reflective of pop culture, not leading pop culture.
You mentioned there just before about Anna and Chloe's relationship that, Anna's still just down the hall. She's not going too far. But what do we know about their relationship and how much impact Anna will still have on the future of Vogue?
I think she has enormous impact. I think everybody thinks that she's resigned, but I think, in fact, she's made herself even more powerful. I'm pretty convinced she'll be there for life. I really do think she has a job for life. I mean, she's an icon. She's, Vogue and Anna are the same, in people's heads are the same thing. And so I was actually really heartened by this appointment because I thought, here's this young woman who's clearly really intelligent, has worked there for a long time, has done the hard yards. If she's been there for more than a decade, she's come in during the early part of the digital revolution and has a respect for Anna and can work for her. So that's really a nice symbiotic relationship, because if you look on the internet, the people going, oh, it should be Victoria Beckham or Dua Lipa or some, celebrity stylist. And it's like, that's not what the media game is. It's a really complicated and difficult and fraught, vocation and fraught business. And it's not, you don't just have a figurehead who wears clothes. I really applaud that choice because I feel like she's done the hard yards and respects Anna as Anna should have that respect.
I really liked what you mentioned there, how when people think of Vogue, they think of Anna Wintour and her influence and Vogue in itself. When it comes to things like the Met Gala, will we see Anna still being in charge of massive events like that?
I would imagine so, because there's a wing at the Met dedicated to Anna, and it's also that huge fundraising that she's done for the Met. Through, that's how it started. It was a very sort of top end of town New York event that then went, as the world changed, branched out into celebrity. So I'm very sure she would have her hand over the Met Gala, of course. I mean, that's going to be one of her biggest legacies, already is one of her biggest legacies, but will continue to be one of her biggest legacies. So I guess by having someone like Chloe doing more of the day-to-day stuff, she can concentrate on bigger projects, but I don't think Anna intends on letting go of anything particular. I think she's still going to be front row at the shows. She's still going to be running the Met Gala. She's still, on those Zoom calls with those editors, making those decisions. So it's not a backward step. It's just more of a consolidation of power.
Something that people might not know is that in June, the magazine did receive criticism for publishing an online cover of Lauren Sanchez Bezos, the bride of Jeff Bezos, and this profile was actually written by Chloe. Is this a sign of the direction that Vogue could steer in?
Yes, is the short answer to that, because it's numbers. And so whether you thought that was the most tasteful, the most groundbreaking, the most beautiful, the most elegant cover, it's newsworthy, and that started when they had to open the door to stars like the Kardashians, and you saw the Met Gala list change and influencers became part of the landscape. Anna made that decision, and she had to. This is what's currently happening. Vogue can't ignore it. But by doing that, I think by having to be more egalitarian and actually play in that space, I think that titles such as Vogue lost their authority, and because that insider thing that people used to poke fun at was also the allure of Vogue, that it was very insider and only they had the knowledge, and it was people kind of loved the fact that it was so elitist. Once you lose the elite part, you're just scrambling with any other website to keep up with, who's at the Venice Film Festival. And you see that if you follow Vogue on Instagram, it's still a Kardashian or a red carpet reveal or whatever. It sort of isn't that pure fashion that Vogue was in the 70s and 80s and way back, 30s, 40s, So it will change. It's weddings, it's Bezos, it's Louis Vuitton buying stories. The whole thing's changed.
Do you think Vogue has to lead in that direction, though, and do that in order to survive?
Yes, it does. Every business is scrambling to work out where their revenue streams are, and because if print's a lost leader, if print's not working, then that print revenue, which was what they would, the rivers of gold, when you thought about those September and March issues, those big thumping, things that dropped on the desk that felt like a brick. Every single one of those pages was probably $50,000. Well, that's gone. So where is their revenue? It's all about clicks and eyeballs and who pays for what, and it's a very different game to what it was just a few decades ago, really early 2000s, very different game nowadays. So they have to do that to keep afloat, but then my question would always be, but people like the elitism of you and then you become populist, then you stand for neither. When I teach fashion students at college about writing, I would always say to them, if you're going to Google and increasingly use AI as your search tool, are you going to read fashion information from brunettinparis.com, or are you going to go to Vogue? Because they have an archive, they have a memory, a corporate memory that stretches back decades, where facts and history inform your fashion information. And for me, that's really important. I'm a journalist. I care much more about facts and history than I do someone slaying on the red carpet. And that's what I think titles like Vogue stand for. Their archives, their sense of place in the world. And I think if they lose that, if it just goes to Vogue weddings, that's where I feel that we will lose out, because Vogue isn't just a fashion. I mean, now it's an attention-seeking environment now, and it's the person who makes the most noise and gets the most attention that wins the game. It's just a completely different business now. But I feel very committed to mastheads. I don't want the Guardian to die, the Vogue, the New York Times, the Sydney Morning Herald. I want things that you can trust in an increasingly distrustful environment. And I think that's what Vogue did stand for, but we'll have to watch that space.
Kirstie, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you, Helen.
That was Kirstie Clements, former editor-in-chief of Vogue Australia. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. But before you go, though, if you could rate and review The Briefing wherever you're listening from, it's a really easy way you can support everything we do here on the show. And you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.